All right. So, good evening, everyone. My name is Abhishek Jain, and I'm pleased to invite you all to the third episode of the LLM series by Planty. Towards the end of this session, we would also be having a Q&A session, for which I would request you all to put your questions in the live chat box. Today, we are very fortunate to have with us Nivedita Mukhija, a graduate of the 2016 batch of NLS Bangalore. She then went on to pursue her LLM from Columbia Law School in 2020. She is currently practicing as an advocate. In this session, Nivedita will be speaking in detail on the application process as well as the opportunities available after completing an LLM from the Columbia Law School. I would now like to hand it over to her to begin the session.
Thank you. And hi to everyone who's watching this live or if you find it later. I would like to start by introducing myself briefly again. I graduated from National Law School of India, Bangalore in 2016. Then I did a clerkship with Justice Uday Umesh Lalit at the Supreme Court of India. And thereafter, I worked for a while with Mr. Siddharth Luthra, who's a senior advocate practicing at the Supreme Court as well. Thereafter, I did my LLM at Columbia, and I also recently passed the New York bar exam. And now I'm back to litigation in Delhi, and now trying to figure out the workings of the lower courts, especially. So this is my story about the LLM. But today I'd generally be talking about pursuing an LLM from Columbia Law School. I think when we talk about why you would want to apply to Columbia Law School, a few things immediately spring to mind for people. Obviously, it's ranked well. It's an Ivy League school. Having said that, I don't think that should necessarily be one of the biggest things you should look at. The unique advantages that I see of applying to Columbia are, firstly, of course, its location, and with that come different kinds of advantages. So, for example, in terms of career opportunities, a lot of big law firms are situated in New York. A lot of companies have their head offices in New York. A lot of international organizations, pretty much every major international organization will have a solid New York presence. This obviously translates into a lot of job opportunities for people. This translates into a lot of people coming in as guest lecturers for different talks. It translates into opportunities for people to intern alongside at some of these organizations and build contacts. And of course, just the general exposure you have around because of this environment of being in the cultural capital of the world. Now, related to this location, I would say that Columbia is also different from other law schools in that it has a very strong clinical approach. Now, by that, I just mean that in India, most of our teachings are situated and limited in the classroom. But there you have the option of taking a lot of externships, which are basically sort of you can work at, say, the public defender's office. You can work at the UN. You can work at some civil litigation center. You can work at the immigrants clinic. So a lot of these opportunities which are associated with the curriculum at Columbia, which you can get exposed to and get credits for. That's like real work experience. And it's this opportunity tied in with the fact that there are so many of these organizations and head offices here. It works great because I think Columbia is kind of acknowledging that it's uniquely placed in this regard and thereafter giving so many externships and clinical opportunities. Of course, not all of them are open to the LLMs. So I think you would have to research them and check the eligibility of each of them based on the courses and the externships offered that year. Now, I think aside from that, you always have to make sure that the specific coursework that you're interested in, the specific field that you're interested in, the specific field that you want to break into, that is strongly represented in the university that you apply. So, for example, for me, when I looked at some of the coursework and the projects that Columbia was involved in, and some of the notable teachers and professors pertaining to subjects I was interested in, it made sense for me to apply. And I think that is a this is a very personal factor, but it has to be dependent on your academic interests or your career interests. It can't. So, for example, just because a law school is ranked highly doesn't mean that it has good courses with respect to the area that you are interested in. So you have to make sure that Columbia is the right fit for you in that regard as well. And of course, living in New York in general is super fun, and you get exposed to so many unique cultural experiences, just the people and the life. I can't really say that that's a small factor. It wasn't for me, and I really did enjoy that aspect of it. Now I want to come to the requirements that an educational institution like Columbia looks for in students applying for the LLM. Now I think, as opposed to the UK, which in my opinion looks more at your grades, and you really need to have like really good grades to get into Oxbridge, near perfect grades, top of your class. However, I think Columbia really takes a more holistic view of a candidate's profile, and it actually explicitly, and you find this on the website as well, gives special weightage to work experience, which again comes from being a law school that is so focused on the practicals of law, the clinical teaching of law. So it attracts practitioners across the board. So Columbia really is looking for people who have worked out there, combined with, of course, good grades. But it's okay if you don't have the best grades, as long as you have some substantial work experience to show that you've really worked in the field. And yeah, I don't think they're really looking for most people to go and become academics over there. Also, I think this is the age requirement is also important. Not the age requirement, sorry, the experience requirement is also important, because when you enter a law school batch like Columbia's, I think I was definitely at 27 amongst the younger people in my batch. People there definitely come with a lot of like experience, and I think to get the best out of that exposure, it really helps to have had your own like experience of that field, of that area of law, and bring something to the table when you're sitting across from all these international students with wonderful stories. I would want to talk here about the financials. Now, an LLM, as we all know, is an expensive affair, for sure. And Columbia is, I think it's probably one of the most expensive degrees in the US and probably the world. It's just really expensive, and living in New York, of course, is another huge expense. So, what are the options available to you if you can't afford this expensive tuition? For those of you who want exact figures, Columbia provides, there's a page with like financial costs and estimates for the forthcoming year. And I think this year it's something like 78 lakhs. That's a lot of money, which most of us just don't have. There are a few options available. I'll just briefly talk about them. But I encourage all of you to do your research about the financials really well, because it's a very expensive degree and there's no going around that. So Columbia itself, it does give some scholarships, but I wouldn't say that there are too many of them. And I've never really heard of it giving a full scholarship. There have been some partial scholarships. There have been some interest-free loans. And Columbia also has some specific fellowships in particular fields where they also often either waive a significant amount of tuition fee or give some other concession like that. Um, a couple of those scholarships, one of them is, for example, the Human Rights Fellowship at Columbia, which is actually really competitive and famous. And for that, I think you need to have shown a demonstrated interest in human rights work with your work experience. And there's another fellowship, the Jagdish Bhagwati Fellowship, which is actually instituted by the Indian government, which is in international trade. There's also a couple of other fellowships and prizes. I recommend you check the same out at Columbia's page, where they again have a separate section for financial aid and tuitions. Now, this is just Columbia itself. Outside of Columbia, you do have certain scholarships in terms of international scholarships. There's, of course, the very, very competitive, again, Fulbright and INLAC scholarships. I wouldn't really count on them unless you are 100% certain about your profile. But nevertheless, give it a shot. Give it your best shot. Having said that, domestically as well, we have a few scholarships. They are not very significant. Many of them are interest-free loans. I know that Narottam Seksaria has, I think, around a 20 lakh interest-free loan scholarship. And Tata also has a similar scholarship, which I, in fact, qualified for. And so I did apply for these scholarships, and they have their own separate timelines. For some of these international scholarships, for example, the Fulbright Fellowship, you have to start much earlier. I think you have to start preparation like around the same time you start your master's application, and there's a very early deadline for its application. With respect to, for example, the Tata J.N. Tata Endowment scholarship, which I got, I applied after I was already admitted into a couple of law schools. So you have to keep a track of these deadlines. So, for example, even the specific fellowships at Columbia that I talked about, the Human Rights Fellowship or the Jagdish Bhagwati Fellowship, they have their, I think most of them are along the same time as your LLM application submission, but they have their own process. They have a separate essay, you can submit separate referees. So, aside from your main LLM application, you're doing all of this as well. If, of course, you need the financial help, which I'm sure most of us would need, especially if we're young and don't really have that kind of money. I also think that this, I'm probably talking about the financial aspect because I feel like thinking about this, even to yourself, makes it clear that you need to be very certain about your reasons for doing a master's and what you're really looking for, because it is a huge investment, and it's probably best to come in with a clear plan instead of treating it as an exploratory degree, because then you're really losing out on like every precious hour of class that you paid for. um So now I'll talk about the main application process. So the regular deadline for Columbia every year, I think, is around 18th December. I think there is also an early deadline. There's an early submission deadline. I'm not sure how many people actually submit early or if that has any benefit to it. But I submitted quite like at the last minute and it was fine. So I'm not sure if that really has any bearing on it. So the process itself, you create an account through LSAC, which is LSAC. It's a portal which is used by a lot of law schools in the US. You create a profile, you pay a certain amount, and then it's used as a common portal by these law schools through which your applications are submitted. So you create an account, you make sure that your law school sends your transcripts and your diplomas and your rank list, if any, to LSAC and it's received on time. And you can submit your separate SOPs and letters of recommendation for each law school. So Columbia also follows this common process through LSAC. Um, I think alongside this LSAC process, which you should start, I would say you shouldn't delay it more than October end. Probably October is a good time to start on all of this stuff, where you create an account, get your documents in order, probably schedule a TOEFL. You can ask for a waiver of an English exam requirement, but I think the TOEFL is fairly easy and it's probably like less hassle instead of individually asking colleges to waive this requirement. So I gave the TOEFL around October end. You pay a separate application fee aside from the LSAC fee you pay for each university you apply to. I think there was like an $85 fee for Columbia. Again, not really cheap just for an application. So I think which also should be a factor in how many colleges you want to apply for, perhaps. So my personal experience with this entire process, which started with this LSAC setting up the whole soul searching of the writing of statement of purpose, which took months, the figuring out letters of references and how to go about that. All of this for me, it was a grueling experience. I think it is for anyone who applies, especially because I was working alongside. My boss at the time, Mr. Siddharth Luthra, was very kind enough to give me some time off for these applications. But even then, it definitely is something that is very resource heavy, like in terms of your time, your mental space. So I think the earlier you start preparing and thinking about why Colombia, what am I getting from there? What am I contributing to Colombia's diverse culture? Why am I really doing the LLM? Like the earlier you start thinking about these core questions, the easier the process gets, because I feel like if you leave these things to the last moment, you just don't have the deep kind of thinking or introspection that these processes often really require you to show. They want you to know exactly why you want to do this. Why do you want to attain higher education after you've already finished one degree in the field? So I think now I would like to talk about my own experience at Columbia and the kind of courses I took and the kind of experience that I had myself. So I took a bunch of really diverse courses at Columbia. Just to backtrack so that it makes sense about how I structured my own LLM. I always wanted to do a master's, and my primary reason was really just education itself. I wanted that second degree. I wanted to study more at a good institution, and I wanted to kind of get an edge on certain professional skills and subjects that I felt like would be a great accessory to me in my career ahead. But of course, that career I always thought would be Indian criminal litigation, in fact. So, some of the courses I took, you see the clear benefit of it for in my field. A course I took was Science and the Courts. It helped us examine how law treats all these upcoming technologies and sciences. And these questions frequently come up in court, right? So, ranging from psychiatry to plastic surgery to DNA evidence. So we went through all of that. And my teacher was, in fact, a sitting judge in the federal court, in the district court of New York. I think it was the Southern District Court of New York. And we actually went to a courtroom hearing where he called an expert who actually spoke about whether they thought an accused person had a bipolar disorder or not. it was quite an interesting experience for me, and I thought it was helpful for me to understand these things to perhaps have an edge when I come back in Indian litigation. Another course I took was um, internet and computer crimes. Again, I think the reason is kind of fairly obvious. Uh, I feel like cybercrime is how things are now moving ahead, and Indian law is still fairly trying to understand this area, trying to figure it out. So I really wanted to understand how another jurisdiction and its law grapples with these problems which arise with cybercrime, such as jurisdiction, intermediate liability, and so on. So that was also a very interesting course. And then, of course, there were some courses that were at the periphery of my interest. So, for example, I took a course called International Criminal Courts, and it was taught by the one of the heads, I think, at Human Rights Watch, and he actually took us to a UN Security Council meeting where they were talking about Libya, I think. So again, great exposure. I figured out how the ICC works. Again, maybe not something I'm directly going to apply in my career, but actually, we spoke a lot about trial in that class because again, international criminal court is a criminal court, and there's a lot of common law in there. So again, I thought it was great. It was greatly beneficial to me because I also got to hear some of my batchmates who had worked as prosecutors in these offices or had some kind of like defense experience in their own countries. So, and someone who was actually from the army. So it was definitely great exposure again. Then, of course, I took some courses on science and the internet. I think were big themes in my courses, but also then I took negotiation just to kind of like see if I can get some soft skills which are like severely neglected in Indian universities. And it really was an eye-opening course, and we had multiple simulations every week with different problems. We had to negotiate a different problem each week, and I really learned how to view negotiating as a non-zero sum game. So just things like that, I thought they greatly added to my um skill set and what I wanted to become, and just in terms of like a lawyer ahead. So I think these are the different kinds of uses in which you can take your law courses along, you know. But at the same time, you also want to take something unusual and broaden your horizons. I took a course called Global Challenges of Inside Counsel, which was taught by, I think, the global GC of Ernst and Young, as well as again another sitting judge at New York. And again, every week we just examine problems that inside counsel of all these big multinationals have faced, including the Bhopal gas tragedy, including Satyam. So again, this was a fascinating experience for me. I think what apart from courses, I would say that my experience in Colombia was valuable because of the people I met. I know that right now there's a pandemic going on, and people are perhaps wondering if they should apply right now or wait for a while. While this is a very difficult question, and I think the answer is subjective and will depend on your individual circumstances and limitations. I do want to say that getting exposure to the people was one of the best things that happened to me professionally because of the things you learn, because of the skill sets you can emulate, because of the knowledge you can like just steal from people, but also in terms of like exposure, in terms of personal friendships and bonds that you form. um, so COVID happened during my second semester, right around the time, I think perhaps a couple of months before I was graduating. And I ended up actually living at this JD student, American Egyptian student's house, who became my best friend, somewhere next to a lake. So these are experiences that are unusual and only happen when you're truly out of your comfort zone, when you're in New York with a bunch of amazing people who you don't really know, but you're just thrilled to be there. And slowly, I think you form this kind of community with the best of everyone being brought out. So I do think that if that is something, maybe that's a factor you should consider if you want to think about whether you want to attend classes in person, hopefully in the near future, as opposed to virtual classes. I had some experience with virtual classes in the last 2 months before my graduation, and I must say that the teachers really put in an effort and they really are very helpful and supportive of the students and their special circumstances during these times. But there is something to be said about the atmosphere of a close seminar group when you meet in person and have these roundtable discussions. Um, so, aside from people, I would say that one other thing which I did partly at Columbia, and a lot of other people also do at Columbia, is collaborate with a professor or a visiting fellow on some project, on some research project. It's great brownie points for your CV in your field if you're looking to break into a field. And it's a great way to build contacts. It's a great way to get to know your professor who probably knows many people. I had one such brief research fellowship, and I basically helped prepare a module on the links between the smuggling of the poaching and smuggling of animals and animal parts and funding of international criminal organizations. So a very interesting proposition, and it was I did it for someone who actually works in a specialized organization who provides training to police who work in dealing with international crime, and I think Interpol and other organizations. So that was again a great experience. I know people who got into research TA-ships with their professors and then formed a great bond with the professors, and that led to further career opportunities. Um, so that was a great part of it as well. I was also able to give the New York bar exam, as I mentioned in the beginning, which I also thought is a great addition to the CV. It can only help your CV, it cannot hurt it, especially because uh, while of course I'm practicing as a litigator, it gives me great satisfaction to know that I have all these fallbacks, and that if ever I really want to take advantage of my US degree and perhaps look at an international organization or go into teaching or maybe anything, a New York bar qualification is, I think, in any case, a great addition to the CV. But again, it costs a lot, and a lot of it is, I think, just privilege or just having to figure out your finances. I know that a lot of people require these bar exam, the passing of bar exam, and such requirements for getting admitted into firms in New York. So they, even if they accept you as an employee, they make it conditional on you passing the New York bar exam. So that's also a reason why a lot of people do it. Um, it was also an interesting experience because it kind of forces you to learn back the foundations of law, American law, but you'd be surprised at how many similarities there are. So that's also another aspect or advantage which comes with a Columbia LLM if you want it to. Um, I think lastly, I only want to probably talk about jobs specifically, because while it is true that different people have different reasons for wanting to do the LLM, maybe they want to teach in the future, maybe they want to specialize in something, maybe they want to switch fields, or maybe just like myself, they're looking to broaden their education base. But I think that in terms of Colombia and the US and New York, a lot of people come there looking for jobs. And I think that uh, no one can really tell you what happens. But some people do get employed every year. But I think that varies year by year greatly on current government and administrative policies, immigration restrictions, now of course COVID. So I think that if you have any particular area or field in mind, I would urge you to get in touch with people who work in that field, in that organization, in that area, from a random LinkedIn message to perhaps locating some seniors, friend, or whatever, because they'd be better equipped to tell you the chances of securing a position at that particular time in that field. But in general, I would say that there were also a lot of people who either did not find a job, are still looking for jobs there, or perhaps accepted a job at in another country like the UK or Singapore. Of course, there were people who found New York jobs, and then there are some people who found perhaps fellowships at organizations which might end in a year, which is when our OPT expires for people who pass the LLM. So I would say that it's not a short thing. Looking for a job and getting a job there is another parallel journey that happens as you do your LLM. And people who I saw successfully winging jobs there, and I think winging is the right word, they really started on fairly early, talking to people, just trying to meet people, going on talks, researching a lot. Um, so Colombia is well placed in the sense that we actually have, I think, the job symposium where a lot of, I think, Harvard and Yale, maybe like a couple of other law schools come, a lot of employers come. But whether they're looking for employees from India for whom they'll have to sponsor a visa is another thing. And it is really competitive. And it is a different kind of struggle. So you have to be braced with that. Don't just assume that an LLM will automatically mean job offers. That era is long gone if it ever really existed. I think that's pretty much all I had to say about my experience. In short, I think I had a great time at Columbia. And I think that if your reasons for going there are solid, if you can figure out your financials realistically, if you have an idea of what you want to do with this education, and with so many opportunities that you have to wrap up in 1 year, I think Columbia can be a great opportunity for anyone looking for like 1 year of amazing exposure. And also, I would like to say that if someone specifically has any doubts about applying for masters or applying to Columbia in particular, they can email me. My email address is nivedita.mukhija at gmail.com. And yeah, that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think that was a very, very informative session. And I think it, above anything, like it genuinely explains why somebody should choose Columbia Law School over, let's say, some other law school when they're deciding the possible universities to apply to. So thank you so much for that. We do have a couple of questions actually. So I think the first question is with respect to the application process itself, and it's more about if you could just talk about what do you think would make a good CV or like a good application when you're specifically looking at Columbia Law School?
Okay. So, yeah, like I already mentioned earlier, but I will elaborate on this because it's a really important part, right? I think Columbia, above everything else, is looking at people with work experience, and that's the sad truth for people who are students out there and are looking to apply to Columbia. I wanted to apply to Columbia in my 5th year, but this is what I was told. And while I have seen exceptions to the rule, the website itself says that they will only look at candidates without any experience who have exceptional circumstances that justify getting this degree at this stage. I think that should tell you something. That is not a disclaimer that other law schools have or expect. So, work experience is very, very highly placed. Secondly, I would say that Columbia for sure have good grades. I think that having perhaps below average grades can be made up for with some solid years of work experience, which show that you are dedicated and have been consistently working towards something and improving yourself and giving yourself the skills which your academic side perhaps doesn't show. Um, Aside from that, the usual suspects, publications are always great. Um, what else? I think that, yeah, I think that's perhaps it. Have like good grades, have good experience, uh, publications, paper presentations, all of that is good. Some research work is good because, after all, an LLM is an academic degree. And I don't know, make the hobby section interesting because I have seen that Columbia looks at a holistic profile more than a lot of other law schools. So yeah, really think about putting in interesting stuff as opposed to music and, I don't know, travel. Yeah.
All right. So I think that that was a very interesting answer. As a follow up, though, you mentioned the whole thing about work experience, which I think is a very, very pertinent point with respect to Colombia. So could you elaborate a little more on whether there is like an implicit like a disincentivization for a student who's going straight after 5 years of law school as compared to someone who does, let's say, a 1 year gap and does some work somewhere as an associate or something. And also, if this is something that can be made up in terms of internship experience.
Okay. So, yes, like I said, if you go to Columbia's website, they actually have like a separate paragraph. I think it's under eligibility or admissions, that section. And also I think this is a good like general tip that just like any law school you're applying to, make sure you know their website inside out, what projects they're working on, what are the specific requirements, what are they really saying aside from the general words. So Columbia very clearly says that you have to show us, if you're finally a law student, why we should take you. And it sounds more like, why should we take you? And yeah, I really saw, I don't think I actually remember anyone. Maybe there was one or two people who had no work experience, but you're really looking at a class with an average age of perhaps 30, I think. So I think going in that atmosphere without work experience, you're not doing justice to yourself, I think, and to your own potential, to what you can bring to the table, and also to what you can learn. Because the courses there are so structured, and you have two tiny semesters and so many things to pack into. So I think that the experience really helps you figure out what you want to do. So yeah, I think there is. And the second thing you said was whether you can make it up through internships. I don't think so. I think internships are valuable in showing what you're interested in, what you have been working in, even in your law school. How have you made use of your time? But I don't think they really use internships as a replacement for work experience pretty much ever.
Okay, I think that that definitely provides a lot of insight as to when one should start preparing and how they should plan this out. That's very interesting. I think my next question is actually very very general and it's not specific to Colombia as such. It's actually about the difference in the teaching methodology of, let's say, US versus India. And what do you think about that? Like, did you think that there was a significant difference after having studied in India and then also getting the chance to study in the US? And what were the pros and cons? What did you find better?
Yeah. So I think so. every professor there has a different teaching style. And in fact, when we're selecting courses, there's you can see this online, I think. You can actually, as admitted students, when you're selecting courses, you can look at past student feedback of that professor for a few consistent years, and that feedback also tells you their method of teaching. For example, whether they cold call, whether it's only voluntary, whether it's like uh, periodic, like serial numbers, like, or whether it's only club discussion based, whether it's only lecture and there's no real participation. So that actually helped me. So I already knew what a professor's style was in terms of what I actually experienced. So there were a lot of differences. So there was this one professor, and he cold called me, and I think he grilled me straight for two classes, I think. And it was actually a contracts class that I was doing as a part of my mandatory bar exam requirement. And it was some found it, actually some Europeans, they found it like very aggressive, but it was also very challenging because uh, it was more like a conversation where he constantly kept challenging you to show your understanding of the subjects. But then, of course, there were other classes where the professors didn't really care, or the participation was voluntary and it was fairly easygoing. Um, but then there were also, so there are all different sorts of courses. So obviously, in a smaller seminar group, there were often classes where the professors would just let a free flowing conversation go along, and that it it has its own advantages and disadvantages, in the sense that you don't stick to the syllabus very often, and in the end you realize that, oh no, I haven't really, like, the teacher hasn't really taught me anything. But at the same time, you're learning from all these amazing people and understanding things yourself. So that's like one kind of class. And then there's also, for example, negotiation, where every week was really us getting paired up in random like groups, someone random from the class, and through an algorithm actually, and we have to negotiate a problem, sort out a deal. Maybe like I have to purchase something, maybe it's a service dispute. So again, that was amazing. That was so refreshing. And then we would like do that exercise and then come back, and then the teacher would debrief us, and we would talk about the common mistakes that people do in these situations when they got too defensive, things like that. So I don't think there was any clear pattern. But generally, of course, in the US, the method is so much more participatory, Socratic, while this quality exists even at NLS in some classes, perhaps not many. I would say that in the US, it was so much more pronounced. It gave us this atmosphere of being free academically, to question, to talk about things, to discuss things freely with the professor. Office hours are not just available, but they're highly encouraged. They want you to come to professors and have conversations and build relationships. So in that sense, I loved the US methodology. And actually, that is one of the biggest reasons why I wanted to study in the US as opposed to the UK. So, because I felt like the UK felt closer to how we traditionally study in India, which is more like lecture based and more just by the book. In the US, there was more a spirit of, let's just talk it out, and what do you think and how do you do it in your country? And I found that really enriching.
I think thanks for that, because I think you've made the environment at Columbia sound very, very challenging, but also insanely interesting. So I think that's definitely something that's gotten a lot of us excited. I think I'm probably at my last question, but what do you think would be some kind of tips that you would give to a person who's applying to Columbia to make sure that their application can actually stand out, let's say in terms of CV or SOP or any of the other such requirements?
So I do want to say that I guess Colombia, I mean, of course, it was challenging. But at the same time, I do think that uh, if you're already, if you've done Indian education, it's fine. You'll probably enjoy that so much more. Even though there's so much perhaps reading which you really have to do as opposed to in India where you would skip it. It's just a course that you have chosen out of perhaps 300 odd courses because it interested you so much, you know. So I think that really made all the difference. In terms of tips to someone applying to Columbia, I would say that firstly, with respect to the SOP, start as early as possible. You have to be very, you have to build a very clear narrative. You don't have to fictionalize anything. You don't have to connect dots where dots wouldn't connect just to be like, yes, I've always worked in this field. But one of my seniors told me this, I think years back actually, and I do think this is true. I think when you look back at everything you've done, try to see why you did what you did and what was common in that. Maybe try to capture that. What I'm trying to say is that you can build a coherent narrative without sounding like this is what you've always been trying to do. And also, I think your own path is what makes your application unique. Show them how you got there and show them clearly why Columbia. What do you want to do with that degree in your own life? Why only this degree from this university in this country, you know? Because you're a working lawyer in India, you don't really need that degree. So what really drives you? And I think the clearer you make that, the better your application is. It's not about making it fancy. It's not about gathering the most accomplishments and running around to get the most publications. All of that helps, but having a clear voice helps so much more because I think at the end of the day, they're trying to see how you think in your SOP. They're trying to see if this person thinks in a manner that makes Columbia, the brand, want to associate ourselves with this thinker who will perhaps be successful in the future. So I think, yeah, so introspection, which will take a lot of time and months, so get started on it early. Uh, a few other tips. So, in terms of the LORs, I would say that I think this is an advice that is often given to people by now that perhaps instead of going for the more distinguished references, go for the references who know you more intimately and who can provide specifics and details of your work, which makes them sound, you know, not generic, which makes them sound that they know you as a person, they know the work that you have put in, they know the thinking that you've done, and they recommend you because of this, and this reason. So I think again, just give them a I think give them a clear understanding of what you are as an individual person as opposed to trying to make a generic profile where you perhaps have one month, two publications, three internship experiences, 1 year of work ex. That's fine. Everyone has that. I mean, a lot of people applying will have that. I think aside from that, the only asset you really have is your own path and your own journey. So really think about that. Make yourself stand out in that way. Like you don't have to conform to a very linear path, is what I'm saying. Use your differences as your strengths. Think about why you made those changes in your career, maybe. Um, in terms of any other tips, I would say get done with the administrative part of the application process as early on as possible. And by the administrative part, I mean you're setting up your LSAC account, giving them the fees, making sure that your transcript and diplomas are sent to LSAC, making sure your any bar certifications or whatever the specific requirement of that particular law school is sent. And different law schools may have slightly different requirements on the LSAT portal, making sure you've given your TOEFL and the scores can go there and go there by the deadline, because all of these documents have to reach there by the deadline as well. Making sure you contact your referees ahead of time. Like, be good with this stuff so that you have more mental space to think about what you're really trying to say in your statement of purpose. I think, yeah, that's pretty much it.
I think I would just like to thank you because I think this is an amazing session and it's been very, very insightful, not just about pursuing an LLM at Columbia, but also about why we should even consider Columbia and specifically Columbia as our law school after our UG degree. So thanks again for a really, really informative session. And I think I would just like to take this as an opportunity to thank you again for taking out the time to come for this session.
Thank you so much. I think everyone who does a master's, we're all lost. And everyone, including me, has like begged those two seniors who would like talk to us, maybe like tolerate us every day to ask like every single question. So I think everyone who's gone through the process understands that it is overwhelming. But I think everyone who goes through it successfully also is under obligation to pass it on then. So when you do the LLM, you can perhaps give a similar session.
Hopefully someday. Thanks a lot. Thank you once again.
Thank you.
I have ended the stream.